Have you ever wondered how far you'd go if someone in charge told you to do something you knew was wrong? Well, in 1963, a psychologist at Yale University decided to find out. He set up one of the most famous and, frankly, disturbing experiments in history to test the limits of our obedience to authority. What he found? Well, it tells us a lot about the darker side of human nature.
Milgram himself used this very quote to set the stage for his work. It really just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? It asks a terrifying question. What's more powerful, our own conscience or our instinct to just follow orders? All right, so to really get this experiment, we have to go back in time. The world was still reeling from World War II and the Holocaust. And the question that haunted everyone was, how? How could seemingly normal, everyday people take part in something so horrific? At the Nuremberg trials, this one phrase was heard over and over again from Nazi officials. I was just following orders. Now, you have to ask, was that just a pathetic excuse to escape blame? Or did it point to something much deeper, something unsettling about how we're wired? That's the exact question that got Stanley Milgram thinking. Milgram wanted to study this thing he called destructive obedience. He basically wanted to put that classic excuse, I was just following orders, under a microscope. Could he recreate that dynamic in a lab? Could he prove that the simple command from an authority figure could be powerful enough to make a good person do a terrible thing? So let's look at how he set this whole thing up. And the setting? Oh, it was absolutely crucial. This wasn't happening in some sketchy basement. This was at Yale University. The name itself just radiates authority and legitimacy. You walk in there and you believe you're in the hands of serious people doing serious science. Okay, so think of this like a play with three main characters. First, you have the experimenter, the guy in the lab coat, the clear authority figure. Then you have the victim, who is actually an actor, a plant. And finally, the star of the show, the only person who didn't know what was really going on, the subject. Just a regular guy who volunteered for what he thought was a simple study on memory. And here's the first bit of trickery. To make it seem fair, the roles of teacher and learner were supposedly drawn from a hat. But guess what? It was rigged. The real subject, the volunteer, always drew the teacher slip. This little bit of stage magic was so important because it made them feel like they were responsible for their role, that it was just the luck of the draw. And this was the instrument of the experiment, the shock generator. Just look at those labels. It's designed to be intimidating. It starts off small, slight shock, but then it just keeps climbing. Strong shock, intense shock, all the way up to danger, severe shock. And then, at the very end, just XXX at 450 volts. Every single flick of a switch was a moral choice. So the teacher's job seems simple. For every wrong answer the learner gives, you flip a switch and deliver a shock. And with each wrong answer, you move one switch higher. But pretty soon, as the voltage gets higher, the man in the other room starts to protest. And that's when things get really difficult. Now, the learner's reactions were all pre-recorded, perfectly timed. At first, it's just grunts. But then, at 300 volts, you hear this frantic pounding on the wall. And then after 315 volts, nothing. Just complete, chilling silence. Now, what do? The man isn't answering. Is he unconscious? Is he worse? You have no idea. Every time the teacher would hesitate, look to the man in the lab coat for help, he'd get one of these 4 prods. Look how they escalate. It starts as a simple, please continue. But if you keep resisting, it becomes, the experiment requires that you continue. Until finally, you get this. You have no other choice. You must go on. The pressure was just relentless. Now, some people did refuse. They reached their breaking point. This quote here really captures that moment, doesn't it? The instant where a person's own moral compass just screams louder than the voice of authority. These are the people who stood up and said, no, I'm done. But here's something that is so important to understand. Even the people who obeyed weren't having an easy time. Not at all. They were in agony. They were sweating, trembling, stuttering. Milgram even saw some subjects dig their fingernails into their own skin. Some broke into these really bizarre, nervous fits of laughter as they were flipping the switches. These were not monsters. They were people in a terrible, terrible conflict. So now we get to it, the results. This is the part of the story that absolutely stunned the world, and honestly, it changed psychology forever. It's all about what we think we would do versus what we actually do. Okay, before I show you the numbers, let's do a little thought experiment. Milgram asked a bunch of psychiatrists, his colleagues, and psychology students at Yale this exact question. What percentage of normal people do you think would go all the way to that final 450-volt switch? Just think of a number in your head.
The experts? Their average prediction was just over 1%. Basically, they thought only the true sadists, a tiny pathological fringe of society, would ever go that far. They were confident that almost everyone would stop when the person in the other room started yelling in pain.
The reality was unbelievable. 65%. Let that sink in. Nearly 2/3 of the participants, 26 out of 40 ordinary men, pulled off the street, followed the experimenters' orders all the way to the end. They flipped every single switch, right up to the one marked XXX. And you can see the breakdown right here. A handful of people dropped out at 300 volts right when the pounding starts. Good for them. A few more dropped out after that, but look at that last row. 26 people went all the way. The overwhelming majority never said no. So the question that just screams out is, why? Why on earth did so many people do it? What could possibly be powerful enough to make them override their own conscience? Well, Milgram argued that it wasn't about the people being evil. It was about the situation being powerful. Milgram said it was like a perfect storm of psychological forces. You've got the authority of Yale behind you, you think you're contributing to science, you feel like you have to finish what you started, and crucially, it's a slippery slope, it's incremental. Each shock is only a little bit worse than the last one, so it's easy to justify taking that next small step, and the next one, and the next. So in the end, Milgram's big takeaway was this. This wasn't a battle between good people and bad people. It was a battle between two of the most deeply ingrained instincts we have, our desire not to harm another human being and our tendency to obey authority. And in this very specific, very powerful situation, authority won. And that leaves us right back where we started, with a question that's just as powerful today as it was decades ago. From the time we're kids, we're taught that being obedient is a virtue. But this experiment forces us, it demands that we ask ourselves, at what point does that virtue become a vice? At what point does just following orders become a crime?